So, Emmanuel, where does Liszt sit in your personal pantheon of composers?
Very, very close and near the top. I have always had a fascination for his music and what he's achieved, especially with the medium of the piano, to make it sound like an orchestra, to make this so much more than just a keyboard. And so transcending the instrument that way in a very different way, for example, that Bach transcended the medium as well. But it was a different approach, but the same idea. And of course, through my mentor, Ruth Nye, who was herself a student of Claudia Rau, I have sort of this wonderful lineage that goes back then to Martin Krause, who taught Arau, and Liszt himself.
That is amazing, isn't it? That you've got this 5-generation link straight back to Liszt, the pianist, the composer, the teacher.
Yeah, it's really astonishing to me that I imagine how close I felt growing up to hearing stories. I never met Arau and I never heard him live, but through Ruth, I know so many stories about him and his way of thinking and what he taught her, that I feel such proximity, like a benevolent, aura above me, guiding me in the right direction. And to think that when he opened the score, he had that same proximity to Liszt. He would have never met Liszt, but through his teacher, that if he opened the Liszt B minor sonata, he had that same, he would have heard so many stories about Liszt and what he thought. That amazes me, that proximity he had with that composer.
And the fact that Liszt gave advice, shared thoughts with Martin Krause, who passed those on to Arau, to Ruth Nye, to you. I mean, it does feel so close, doesn't it?
Yeah, it brings it, because we have a tendency as musicians, we revere these composers, and so we should, and their music, but with that comes a danger of, it's like if you open the Beethoven's Fourth Concerto, the opening G major chord, if you're too scared of it, because it's supposed to be the most sublime opening, but it's just a G major chord. And if you revere it too much, it can actually impede what you're trying to convey. So that proximity means that it becomes less these dusty, godly figures and more a human figure with their doubts and their imperfections and their everything that makes us human. And that is enriching, very enriching as a performer.
I sometimes think of Liszt as being superhuman. I mean, his ability to squeeze so much into his life as a prolific composer, a brilliant virtuoso pianist on the road, entertaining people night after night. And this teacher as well, with so many students, his life was so multifaceted and so given to others.
I think that is what I love the most about his character is by all accounts his generosity. It's not the attitude of I'm going to keep all these secrets for myself, and I like that very much.
He made incredible demands on himself as a pianist, but then on generations of pianists that have followed. And there, I think, something that you absolutely relish.
Yes, I mean, one of the most important teachings, I think, that was passed down to me is the idea of treating the score as the basis of everything. Your role as a performer is not to please or not to please. It's simply to communicate, express what this music is about, bring it to life to the best of your ability with the most integrity and honesty you can that you really believe this is what this music is about. It's all about the music. You're just the conduit.
You are an agent delivering.
You're the middleman, as
was
Fleischer
written
used to say. Fleischer used to call artists the last middleman of modern society. And I couldn't agree more that this is what we are.
How do you do that?
Well, you do that by starting to know as much about what you're playing as possible. The person, placing the piece in context of their entire output. And I don't just mean piano, I mean, of course, chamber music, orchestral music. I mean, how can you play Debussy at the piano if you haven't heard his amazing orchestration? Because when Debussy writes piano, he writes for orchestra. And Liszt is the same. And if you play Beethoven Sonata, you can't possibly play, I think, something like Hammerklavier or the Sonata if you're not aware of Beethoven's development as an artist, as a composer. Which is why someone like Arau had an encyclopedic repertoire. He would just play everything. He started, I think, in Berlin, did a series of 12 concerts when he was 30, 31, where he played all of Bach in 12 recitals by memory. Everything.
Staggering achievement.
The inventions, even the small pieces, the big pieces, everything. And he told Ruth that he said, I might have had a memory lab in one of the partitas. He said, but I covered it quite well, dear. He said, it's just, and this is not a Bach, what you would consider today a Bach specialist. And then after doing all that, he decided actually Bach probably is better served on a harpsichord. But he knew all of Bach, right? It's just, so the kind of hard work and dedication behind that is unbelievable. And in the integrity to say, I have done all this work, but actually I believe this should not be played on this instrument. You may disagree. I disagree, for example. I think Bach can sound wonderful on the modern piano. But just that integrity is very inspiring. Very, very inspiring.
And is that level of deep diving into a composer, into an area of the repertoire, still possible today? Is that still how you work now?
Yes. I think that you have to push yourself, and it's very easy and comforting to rest on things you know well and you can do well, but I think it's essential that you push yourself outside of your comfort zone and you keep learning your repertoire. And choosing music you're going to play is a little bit like choosing a script as an actor, and I think if you end up doing the same role all the time, being an actor is about changing who you are. And it's the same as musicians. I think if you explore new worlds and things that are very foreign to you, it's extremely enriching. Most important, I think, is the approach to the composer. Arau, for example, he always said if there is one single crescendo he didn't understand in a Beethoven sonata, why it was there, he would not play that sonata, full stop. It's easy to do a crescendo, just play louder, increase your sound. But if he didn't understand, really feel why it's there, he would not play it. It's complete lack of compromise, which in life, compromise is a good thing, but I think for interpretation, it's not. And then the second very important thing I would say is approach to technique. Depending on the composer you play, of course, realizing that difficulty in itself has beauty to it, has drama to it, so that you would never consider taking any kind of shortcuts or trying to alleviate risk. To me, I always see it as if you're looking at a tightrope walker, you could think, okay, if they were doing it between two tall buildings without a safety net, everybody would stop on the street looking at this person, right? You would just literally just be so scared for them, and the drama to that, everybody would stop what they're doing in their lives. Versus that same activity same tightrope artist above a gym mat, 1 meter in a gym. No one would pay any attention. Same activity. The only thing that's changed is the drama, the risk. Now in that case, it's life and death. When we play, it's a wrong note. It's a memory lap. It's the sun will still rise the next day. And I think if you ask most musicians what our favorite recordings are, they're filled with wrong notes. Nearly all the musicians I ask.
Because people have taken risks.
Because people took risks, because people didn't care. Of course, the editing we have now is the technology we have now, we can change anything. When Arau recorded the Beethoven concerto, he would literally play the first movement through, do it again, and then they say, right, I think we have it, let's get on with second movement. And I think we are in the danger of losing that. And I think if we remind ourselves that it's not the end of the world, I'm much more willing, if I sit in a performance and I see someone taking risks, I will forgive them any wrong notes. I will, I really will. What I want is for them to change my life, to make me cry, that's what I want. I'm not there to be at a circus or a sports activity watching, being impressed how fast and how accurate and how loud it is. And that's, an AI will be able to do that very soon, much better than any of us. What I want is for them to relate to me on a human level and tell me what this means to them. And that's what I want. And that's the performances I've sat through in my life of people like that I can still remember. I still remember Radu Lupu making me cry. In Brahms 1, I was like a little boy. I knew Brahms 1 inside out, and I completely forgot I could play the piano. It was such an astonishing performance.
How do you achieve that sense of risk when you're playing a program that you know well, perhaps the program that you've recorded for your new album, which you'll also be playing live in concert on multiple occasions? How do you keep that sense of the tightrope, the risks, the danger?
When I first studied the Liszt Sonata, that's there, I was maybe 15, 16, and I remember going through it with Ruth, and she would tell me things about certain passages that, Martin Krause said Liszt used to do it like that because of this and that. I mean, it's difficult to argue with that. So for example, that very first opening sequence, nearly everybody now plays splits between two hands. And of course I can understand why. We're human, we're going to split this. This is not possible to do accurately 10 out of 10. You will not. There is a time where you will split it. Martin Krause was adamant Liszt used to do this one-handed. And for Liszt, that was a leap of faith. That was the first sort of entry into that temple of, do you dare? If you do, come in, and make that leap. And if you play it, I promise you, you're sitting there, you're doing these bars. Your heart rate accelerates because you know that's coming, and you have to be willing to put yourself in that situation. As I said, I will forgive any performer that does this and splits it. That they've tried. They're human, they will,
But they've taken the risk.
They've taken the risk. It's like, the first Beethoven Hammerklavier. It's not a very difficult leap, but it's risky. And that risk, it's a heroic gesture, that Hammerklavier. It's our hero. He's hopefully a brave hero, who is willing to take risks. And the thing to me that's important is that to dissociate that and thinking that has no impact on music, I think that's too detached way of thinking about piano technique. You can fake that risk. You can bring drama. I'm not saying it's impossible, but why fake it? Why not give me the real thing? I want the real thing if I'm sitting there listening to you.
The B minor sonata is half an hour unbroken journey. It's one of the most recorded, most performed pieces. It probably has more analysis about it than written by musicologists than almost any other piece of music. Why now? Why have you come to it at this point?
As I said, I studied this when I was 15, 16 years old. And I rate this piece as high up as Bach, Beethoven, Mozart. I'm not saying the entire output of Liszt, but this particular work I think is right up there. And it's been growing with me in the background for many, many years, and now is the time to express what I want to do with this and with Liszt repertoire in general. What is important to me that I want to pass on. There's so many things we hear of Liszt, I think, that can easily convey an image of superficiality or of showmanship. Krauser recalls the story of Liszt playing the Beethoven Moonlight Sonata to him, and how it was the most unforgettable experience, that he was in tears after the first few bars. That's the Liszt that I want to show that exists, and the important artist, what an artist that he was, and how much influence he had. This piece influenced everybody after it was written. I think it's probably the finest piano sonata written after Beethoven or Schubert. It's so tightly conceived. The craftsmanship behind it is astonishing. It holds, as you say, it's a 30 or slightly over 30-minute structure, continuous structure, and yet all the Motivic material you will hear is on the first page.
Presented as a sort of calling card to be returned to.
To be returned to. A little bit like in a Wagner opera, or there's debate what this piece is based on. And again, for Araro and Krauser, there was no debate. It was, of course, based on Faust.
Because people have suggested Paradise Lost, Garden of Eden,
yes,
something autobiographical from Liszt's
yes.
own life.
And I'm sure every piece in a way is autobiographical. Of any piece of art, in some sense, is a piece of yourself. It's like giving birth to a child.
But you think there's definitely a programmatic element?
Yes. You have different characters, and the Mephistopheles character is very important in the opening. That's what this is about. And so when you have this start, this very ominous it's hard to convey. A devil character would be, by in essence, cold, inhuman. It shouldn't sound beautiful. It would be remote from all the things we consider to have value, and that's what he's trying to do here. The motif that comes here. It's nasty, it's ugly, and it's supposed to be this way. This theme is going to be very, very important throughout. So that theme underneath here with the bass, it's like the devil laughing nearly. I always thought of that when I was studying it. He's going to transform it completely later in the piece to this beautiful love theme. So if you bring that theme higher up and you play it in major, it sounds like this. Slowed down, it becomes. It's the most astonishing transformation. And the idea behind it was one that was crucial to Liszt, was the idea of redemption. The idea that you can take the nastiest sounding, deadliest sounding thing and turn it into this light. And you find that in Liszt music all the time.
Clearly, you can listen to this sonata in different ways, can't you? You can simply listen to it as a piece of music, and you'll get an awful lot from that. But if you start thinking about these motives, listening out for them, listening to how he develops them, it becomes a much more three-dimensional experience, doesn't it?
Yes, and you discover. I mean, I still discover things, constantly amazed by the craftsmanship in that particular theme. For example, I've just played something that just to show you that why I consider it as, you know, to the same level of craftsmanship as Bach and Mozart and Beethoven. The bass line underneath this. You get so he combines the opening, the scale, descending scale is things like that are everywhere. This is why this is a composer of the highest order. It is not something that's just there to make noise and impress the gallery.
So part of this, it feels that, you know, you want us all to look at Liszt afresh, because so many people do approach him with that view, this great virtuoso showman, literally performing to the gallery. But you want us to think a lot more about what he was really doing, how brilliant he was, how much more depth there was to everything he did.
Yes. I think certainly the repertoire I've chosen for this album is a reflection of that. I think one of the most beneficial things Liszt could have done with is a good editor, a good friend who would say, you know, let's not publish that one. You know, that's just for you to play after dinner to some aristocrat.
But it's all out,
you know.
there.
But the problem is it's all there. And so I'm not saying that his output, everything is to that level, far from it. But there is very few composers who are even and where everything you can't say everything they've written is an absolute masterpiece. You know, even if he had just written this work and nothing else, it would have been for me enough. It's such an important work in music history. I mean, you think of that opening sequence. Think of I don't know, Strauss' Alpine Symphony. That descending scale that goes down. I'll speed it up for you. Goes down to the B flat. With the trombones, you know. That ominous feel of, again, we have this great mountain in front of us, this Odyssey. Or think of Schomburg's Verklärte. You know, the opening. Again, we have this descending. And the influences are everywhere. I really feel that without this work,
they couldn't have
music history would have been very different afterwards.
Yeah.
The hero theme that comes later, which is, to me, it's a representation of Faust. That's such a heroic, obviously, statement. If you think of what he's doing here, if you accelerate this, just take the rhythm. So you get this. You get that same motivic, rhythmic idea, but this time we're going up, we're not going down. Why? Because we are hopeful, we are heroic. And then what does he do with the bass? Astonishing. You get the D. It's just everywhere you look. And then that hero theme later on would be corrupted In the same way, reflecting the Faustian idea will be corrupted by Mephistopheles in such a wonderful way. This. Again, this is ugly, nasty. I'm not trying to have what you would consider beautiful sound here. I'm trying to have a hard, pleasant to the ear, shocking.
Isn't it? Yeah.
It's FFF, pesante, and it's meant to be dead, nasty. Yeah. And that is reminiscent, if I always think of that as, it's like a Gotterdammerung, the can't do it justice on the piano.
Telling me earlier on that the original score is well worth looking at, because you can see how much he changed it, how many corrections he made, how the work evolved as he wrote.
Yes, you can see where he changed his mind, how much he worked on the overall structure, how he would go back and stick a new piece of a manuscript paper on top of another, and change his mind. You kind of wish you could
peel back.
But you do also have some sections that are just crossed over, and then that you can play and see, and it's interesting to see why he changed his mind. Very famously, he changed the ending, and thank God he did, because he has this closing statement. Now we're in B major. Now we have two chords that are like the first two repeated bass notes of the opening. We have our scale going down. But it doesn't quite make it as far as the B. We're still unresolved. Stays on that C, one note short of the B, and then he gives us this amazing cadence. And the devil has the last word.
Yeah.
And that to show you how careful he was. So that B finally resolves the C that we were hanging on from this.
But he keeps you waiting.
And then finally we get the B. And that low B here, to show you how careful he is, it's the first time in the entire piece that we have it. There is no other B at that depth. And there's many occasions where he could have chosen, very good occasions where he could have chosen to have it. I'll just play you one of them. For example, that C is dying to be resolved here. But what does he do? He goes up the octave. So we never hear in our ear the entire piece this low B.
So he keeps you waiting, until the end before you get this resolution.
Exactly. That's how carefully this is thought about.
We talked a lot earlier on about Ruth Nye, your teacher, who first taught you when you were 13. You've described her as being your North Star, someone who still you return to today to discuss music and performing. Did you talk a lot with her about this piece before the recording and work on it again with her?
Well, yes, and she was very happy that I was doing it. I think she was probably feeling about time. You're recording this. I think it's a very important tradition that I want to and that I know it's important to her to keep alive. I like this saying from Mahler, who says tradition is not the worship of ashes, but keeping the fire burning bright. Keep passing this wonderful music on to others and to inspire others to do the same. And this way of thinking, this is just what feels true to me. And I'm so glad I live in a world where there are so many contrasting artists that I love and revere and admire and that inspire me. And that's why we keep coming back to these pieces, because you can make them fresh, you can make them relevant, and you can make them your own.
Will you return to it again, do you think? I mean, it feels like a piece that you might in 20 years' time come back and make another recording of, and it would be completely different.
I would hope so. The biggest insult you could possibly give me after a concert, if you heard me play, is say that was perfect, or that was, that it's a journey. And if I don't play this piece completely differently in 20 years, I will be very disappointed with myself. I mean, that means I should stop. If the journey is no longer happening,
you stop learning.
You stop learning. That's I should be doing something else.
Tell me about the recording process. You recorded it at Saffron Hall in Essex, that wonderful concert hall that doubles up as a school hall and has become such an important performance venue in recent years. Andrew Keener, the great producer, supervised the recordings. How do you like to record? Do you record in very long takes? What's your process?
I try to record in very long takes. Obviously, I have to be mindful of the modern recording process. But I think for a piece like this, we did takes of 10 minutes. I think if you start dealing with the very small, you can get into a tunnel. When you're in a recording studio for hours, you lose sight of the performance. It has to remain as close to a performance as possible. And working with Andrew is a very inspiring human being. The relationship between artist and producer is paramount in a recording. It has become this way, even more so with the editing process. And I always feel their names should be front and center on the cover. Like a movie director. If you go and see the latest Spielberg movie, it's Spielberg. Yes, there'll be a lead actor. Because they decide what take to use and when, and they create something. Of course, it's material you've given to them, but they are responsible for the final interpretation, because not all takes are the same. Sometimes I'll do one idea somewhere, and if you put these two together, that will not work. It will only work if you do it this way. I don't think many people outside the recording world understand just how important and crucial they are to that process.
And do you relish that recording process? I mean, is it something you look forward to, or are you more comfortable on a concert hall stage playing a work in full once and then walking off?
I much more prefer concerts and performing, because what I like is that that sense of something that's done on the moment and that's gone. You've spent so much of your time and life thinking about something, you're just going to give this one time to someone and make that, and then it's finished. I like the fact that fragility there. But I also value enormously the legacy, and I love listening to great artists. Their recordings have inspired me, and so there is enormous value there, of course. But it's a little bit like taking a photograph of a moment that will never happen again, because, as you say, in 10 years I will play it differently, and so it's just an instant, a photograph to remind you of a memory. And that process is, if you have a great producer like Andrew, it is intense, but it is wonderful, because it works and because we trust. There has to be a huge degree of trust there. But it is extremely tiring, and it's 3 days of complete flat out 7-8 hours of you have to give yourself to the full every single take.
With a deadline,
yes,
rapidly approaching.
Yes,
has to finish after the 3 days.
And concert lasts maximum 2 hours, so it's a very different thing. When we practice by ourselves, we don't play like this. We don't play to the full of what we can do. We save our energy, our power, our emotional energy. If we practice, like a performance, we would collapse. And so, but in a recording environment, you have to perform for the entire time you're in there.
When you're working on something as intense as this repertoire and putting it together for recording and then subsequent concerts, how do you sort of balance it in your mind so that you have the right ferocity of approach, that you're not overdoing it or indeed underdoing it?
I try to sort of keep a balance. That's the best I can describe. I think as an artist, going through phases of, if something goes very well, it's a very human thing you should feel happy about it. But it's also a very human thing there's a danger there that you could get complacent, or we all do this. And if you can go through life moments of doubt, of course, we all do that as well. And both are counterproductive. I think what you have to remember as an artist is the path you've chosen. As I said, there is not just one way of doing things. And remembering that you have your own voice, and hopefully you have the means, the craft to express that voice. And that flame is unique to you. No one else has that. And that's why, to me, I always felt strange about things like competitions or in music. Just, I'm on the side of Bartok on that one, where he used to say competitions are for horses, not artists.
Not musicians.
Just because if you are in a competition and you ask me, okay, Glenn Gould, Gilel, Sargerish, Andras Schiff, Pariah, I could give you a very extensive Radulupu. Who wins? Who comes fourth, fifth? Literally, it's a bizarre question. I think Richter was in the jury, and he had given either 0 or 20 to everybody, and so the marks were very strange. And his attitude was, well, either they are artists and they can have something to say, or they don't. It's very binary. And after that, once you've decided that yes, they are, they have a voice and they have the means to say it, what else is there? Like, who am I to say that voice is less valuable than another? I try to stay healthy mentally and have that as a guide.
That requires quite a lot of self-confidence, doesn't it, and self-understanding.
Yeah, and of course, I'm a human being. It doesn't always work. You will go through moments of doubts. You will go, but I try to stay in that, because I know that is where artistically most productive things will happen, and most, that's where artistically I will flourish. I spend a lot of time trying to stay in that zone, to cultivate that as best as I can. And I think that's why, for example, if you were talking to Arao, he hated the idea of schools, of pianistic schools, of clans, he's the first one to say that Martin Krause's students had very different approach, each of them. And it's the same with Ruth. Ruth taught differently. I've heard her, for example, teach, the Chopin Ballade number 1 so many times to different people. Completely different interpretation. Because she's interested into you. You are going to become an artist, a thinking interpreter. She's not interested in turning you into a clone of herself. No one wants to see that or hear that. And so I think that's a very healthy thing to try to remember as an artist. And I try to remind myself of that every day.
And I suppose the other thing is just knowing when to stop. If you're working on something with the level of intensity of preparation that you will have been for the B minor sonata, knowing when I've done enough for the day, or even I've done enough for the week.
Yeah, and not burn yourself out. No, also because it's this activity we have, it's physical, emotional, mental. Sometimes your body might not be with it. Sometimes you're better off just reading through your scores, listening to wonderful Liszt recordings or other music, just getting inspired, going to an art gallery, doing anything than this. Arau used to read, I think he would recommend every student to read 4 hours a day. He would go to art galleries, concerts, and he saw it as part of the duty of an artist's life. And he always tells that story that Krause brought him to, I think, Parsifal when he was 12 or 11 in Berlin, and he fell asleep. And Krause was very unhappy with him. And you know, it's things like that. Just he wanted to educate him, and educate him culturally, so that he had a wide
hinterland.
Yes, and he was able to then place things in their context, and then make the best, most educated decisions when it comes to interpretation. Because of that, you can't fake that.
No, and it makes for a much more rounded artist's life, doesn't it?
Yes, absolutely, and that's how you keep going all your life. I think one of the hardest things to do is to last. To just, it's easy to keep going for 5 years, for 10 years. I mean, Arau, I think he had still something like 160 concerts at the end in a season. It's just an astonishing. And he always said, if I stop, I'm so scared I will, you know, like Horowitz when he had his long sabbatical. I'm always scared I'll be too frightened to ever come back. So he had to just keep going, keep going, keep going. It's an extraordinary life.